Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar that's all about pronouns. My name is Nick. For those that haven't met me before, I'm the founder and CEO of Coteam. I am super excited actually about today's session. We're joined by Chris Allan from Your D+I. I'll let him introduce himself properly in just a moment. But this is something for myself that I often get I stumble up on a lot in my own professional world, and really interested in getting some perspective on Chris's experiences working in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also something that I think is very, very topical at the moment. So it's my absolute pleasure to be here, joined by Chris today, talking all things pronouns. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much. So hi, everybody. My name's Chris. I'm a director of a company called Your D+I. So we're a diversity and inclusion consultancy and have particular focuses on D&I workshops and auditing as well. And you'll hear me often talk about making inclusion the heart of everything that we do. So it's a very big thing for us as a business to make sure we get inclusion right, first of all, before we even start looking at the diversity factor when it comes to D&I. Really excited about today's session. Pronouns is one of the most probably hotly contended subjects, I think, in the world right now, and probably one of the most discussed topics in the world right now as well. So yeah, super keen to get started today. We will be doing like a bit of an icebreaker, I think, just to kind of get us going, which we'll be using Mentee. There's a link and a QR code. And what I would like you to do as you're kind of coming into today's session is I want you to judge me based on your first impressions. Now, I know some people who may be joining the session know who I am, but for those who don't, I would love for you to judge me based on your first impressions when you first joined the session or saw my face on the screen today. So I'll give you a couple of minutes just to kind of get going, but if you use the QR code or the link that Nick's just dropped into the chat, and I'd love to see what your first impressions of me were. There is a point to this, which we'll get to in a couple of minutes. Also, was anyone else dancing to the music? Because my camera was off and I was throwing some moves and very embarrassing.
There's a link there in the chat for everyone that you can click, or again, you can just grab your phone out, scan that QR code on the screen, and that will take you through to the Mentee meter. Give it about 30 seconds.
Yeah. And for the purpose of today's session as well, we will be talking about pronouns. My pronouns are he, him, and his. So please feel free to use them if you do have any comments as we go through this. So what are your first impressions of me? And I want you to be as brutally honest as possible. So we're starting to get some through now. Positive, confident, empathetic, outgoing, genuine, fabulous, Scottish, approachable, smiley, passionate, energetic, genuine, friendly face. Oh, I like that. Casual, that's me down to a T. Cheery, what else we've got? Interesting, engaging, at home. I am at home. Bubbly, smiley. Any more? These are really nice as well. I was saying to Nick before we started that I did this a couple of months ago with a client, and one of the guys in the audience said he looks like he likes a good burger. Which I don't know if he was trying to poke fun or if I generally look like or come across like I like a good burger. So any others for anybody in the room? And be as brutally honest as possible.
I think knowing you, Chris, that's a pretty good summary of who you are. In that
likes a good burger, so. Yeah. I think it's half my personality, if I'm perfectly honest. But someone says down to earth, friendly face, outgoing. So generally kind of the norm of what we usually get when we do this session. There's a reason behind why we do the session, and it's all about unconscious bias and that kind of first impression when we first meet someone. Anybody who's within recruitment will probably know or might be quite surprised that it takes about 4.1 seconds to make a first impression of someone when you first meet them when you're in recruitment. Generally, for everybody else, it's about 7 seconds. And the point of this is to kind of really dig a little bit deeper into kind of someone when you first meet them for the first time and try and get an understanding of who they are. So a bit more about me. So like I said, I run a company called Your D+I. We're a diversity and inclusion consultancy. I also appreciate that I'm a white, cisgendered guy in the D&I world, and I often get the question, why are you in the position that you're in? So I'm an openly gay man. About 14 years ago, I was fired for being gay. So I worked in retail for a very, very long time, worked for a very well-known menswear retailer who no longer exists. And as part of my journey, I was there for about 6 months, and my boss found out about my sexuality and told me that because of the lifestyle that I lead outside of the business, it's not the type of lifestyle they want to promote as a business, and therefore they were going to have to let me go. I didn't get to say goodbye to my staff. I was escorted down the delivery ramp and left to go on my merry way. And that had a huge impact on my life, because this person had one perception of what he thought a gay guy would actually be or look like, or what he would bring to the store. Regardless of your sexuality, it had nothing to do with the way I could do my job. I was very successful within the retail industry, and it's something that haunted me for many, many years within my career. And every job I went into after that in retail, I just didn't feel comfortable talking about my sexuality, or kind of my personal life or anything like that. And it wasn't until I joined university where I felt a bit more comfortable and confident owning my sexuality, just based on what the very nature of a university is. So yeah, I'm an openly gay man. I suffer from anxiety. I know a lot of us do. The world hasn't been a great place over the last 3 years, but that's something that affects me daily. Even doing things like this, my anxiety is through the roof. However, it does help me overcome doing these types of things, and helping keep my anxiety at bay a little bit as well. I have hay fever, which sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, especially this time of year, but it's still prominent. So if I do look like I'm crying at some point throughout today's session, or if I'm quite sniffly, that's why. I'm not just very emotional about what it is we're talking about, as much as it is quite an emotional topic. And I'm a grief sufferer as well. So something that I deal with on the daily, and have done for the last 3 years, is deal with grief as well. So that's a little bit about me. Hopefully will allow you to resonate a little bit more with me, based on kind of finding out a little bit more, which is why we do this session, because people generally have their first impressions, but sometimes we just need to dig that little bit deeper to find out more about the individual. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. But thank you very much for your friendly messages that we got in there.
And thank you for being so open, Chris. You always are, since I've known you, particularly about your story. So, of course, today we're here to talk specifically about pronouns, and pronouns in the workplace. And Chris is going to share some insights and some advice, I guess, from the work that he's been doing in the space. This is very much an open session, though. So if you have questions at any point, you can scan the QR code there on your phone. It should load up a Q&A tab. They are anonymous. You can ask whatever you want, which is a bit of fun. Or click the link that we also shared in the chat earlier. They'll open up the live Q&A, and we'll pick up those sessions at the end. We had some great questions submitted pre this session today, so we will answer those. But then also, if you've got any questions specifically around pronouns, or even maybe more broadly around Chris's experience in the DEI space, please feel free to ask those questions as we go. On that note, Chris, I'm going to really hand over to you to talk about, well, what is the pronoun anyway?
Amazing. Thank you so much. So we've heard it a lot, probably across social media in particular. So if you're a follower of TikTok or Instagram, there's a lot of conversations and debate about pronouns, how people identify, what are pronouns, what does it all mean? So hopefully today's session will answer some of those questions for you. But in its essence, what pronouns are words that we use in place of nouns when talking about other people. We don't like to repeat when we don't like to repeat their name over and over again. So instead, we use personal pronouns like she or him. Often when someone transitions, their pronouns will change, or if someone becomes non-binary, they'll often change their pronouns. So if they once used he and him pronouns, they might start using the likes of she or her, or they or them. And they've evolved, and over history, pronouns have evolved in quite a big way. They don't sound the same today as what they did throughout history. In fact, the Old English third-person pronouns were he, heo, and hit, and he, H-I-E. And over time, heo was replaced by she, and borrowing from Scandinavian, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, he was replaced by they, and hit lost its H to become it. Later still, second person, you and thou shifted from just distinguishing singular versus plural to indicating social distance. Formal versus informal, like French tu and vous, and still later the thou forms were lost and the you pronouns became both singular and plural. And the same thing is happening today with they, which is well on its way to being a standard singular form. So when we talk about they, and this is one of the biggest questions that we get when we do discuss pronouns, is why do people identify as they? It sounds like more than one. It sounds weird. It's not kind of part of normal English. But if you think about a situation that you might be in where you don't know someone's name, for instance, and someone asks you a question about, have you seen this person? And you go, actually, they're over there. So that's a singular term that you're still using. So it is still normal English. But I understand that it is quite confusing when people are using it in certain situations and sentences that they or them sounds a bit strange and it doesn't necessarily hit our ear correctly. And the reason why people do use they and them is because they don't identify with the norm of he or she. And I use the word norm, and I actually hate the word norm because actually gender is so fluid that actually there is no norm when it comes to talking about gender or how people identify. It's just the way people identify. So you'll find that some people who don't identify as he or don't identify as she will use the term they in order to identify themselves. You'll often also see as well that some people use multiple pronouns. And this is a question that I often get, is I just don't understand what they mean when they say that they identify as he and they, or she and they, or in some cases, he, she, and they as well. So if anybody watches Queer Eye, it's probably one of the best examples I could give. So Jonathan Van Ness, who's one of the he's a stylist, I think, on Queer Eye, uses multiple pronouns and uses the pronouns he, she, and they. So on any given day, may identify more as he, so may identify as more masculine. Another day or another period of time may identify more as feminine, and we'll use the pronoun she. And another day they may use they because actually they feel a bit more fluid in their gender and their expression. What I'd often say, and this is where the questions often come up, is, well, what did I refer to them as? And in those situations, when someone uses multiple pronouns, I would say the onus is often on them to let you know how they want to be identified. However, 9 times out of 10, if you use any of the pronouns that they're giving you to use, they'll be more than happy. So I have a colleague and a friend who uses he and she as pronouns and doesn't really care which one you use, as long as you use the correct term. And the same if someone identifies as he and they, 9 times out of 10, they won't mind if you use he or they in a sentence. So
can I ask a quick question? Sorry, can I ask you a quick question here, Chris?
Yeah.
So something that I've started to do, well, not started, but have done for some time now, is just generally, if I don't know someone, I'll use they, them pronouns as just a rule of thumb, rather than making an assumption that it's a he or a she. Is that the correct approach? Like, until someone tells you, like, could you offend somebody, I guess, the other way by like not?
It depends, because sometimes you'll have people who are non-binary that will present in a certain way. So you'll have someone who may present more masculine, and if you don't know the person, you meet them for the first time and you use the pronoun he, then they'll probably correct you and say, actually, I don't identify that way, I identify as they. We all make mistakes, and it's all excuse me, about having an open conversation with the person. But if you're ever in doubt, then I think you're right. I would always use they and them in any situation. So if you're not sure about how someone may identify as their gender, then perhaps use they and them as an indicator. And also, when we're kind of talking about addressing large groups, so a session like today or kind of any given workshop that we do, people are always like, I use guys all the time as a way to kind of address everybody. Now, as millennials and kind of a lot of Gen Z, for those who are in the room, we've grown up with YouTube and we've grown up with these kind of social media influencers who address everybody as, hey guys, and it's almost become this gender neutral term. However, not everybody's going to resonate with that term, and actually they might be doing a bit of a disservice to some of their audience. So this is the hay fever coming through, by the way, with the croaky throat, so just so everybody's aware. But what I would always say is, if you are addressing a room full of people or a group full of people, is perhaps use something like everyone or folks, especially if, there's non-binary people in the room as well. A lot prefer the term folks, and often it's spelled Folkx. So just something else to be aware of. One of my friends told me a couple of months ago that she had saw on social media that someone addressed the audience as guys, gals, and non-binary pals. And I just think that's one of the most wonderful expressions to kind of address an audience, because it's encompassing of everybody. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, brilliant. I was thinking also more like when you email someone for the first time that maybe you haven't met before, just defaulting back to the they, them pronouns. It's just generally better practice, I guess.
Exactly. We did get a question a couple of days ago about prefixes as well. And actually, the company we were working with was quite formal. And when they were sending out emails, they were sending out emails to dear sir or miss or Mrs. And prefixes are probably quite old-fashioned now. I don't know a lot of people who use a prefix unless you're forced to with a form. So even things like that, we're now seeing a change in some forms where you'll have MX, which is a term that's often used for people who are non-binary or who don't identify as he or she, or use Mr. or Mrs. So you'll often see MX as kind of a more gender-neutral term. How it's pronounced, I'm not entirely sure, but if you do see MX on the form, then it's generally an option for those who are non-binary. But yeah, so pronouns are forever changing. The they, them pronouns are often used by non-binary people who identify outside the constraints of male or female. Using they, them pronouns to describe a single person rather than a group of people can be a little bit confusing at first, like I said, but you may not have knowingly done it before, but it's almost certain that you've done it subconsciously or unconsciously. So for example, imagine you're walking down the road and you see a pair of sunglasses on the ground, and you might think to yourself, someone has lost their sunglasses. When you use the word their, you're talking about one person rather than a group, but because you didn't know their gender, you use the they, them pronouns for the sunglasses owner. So like I said, either this is their sunglasses, or that's, or they're over there with them, for instance. So you often use it naturally in the English language. However, for whatever reason, when people introduce themselves with the they, them pronoun, people just get a little bit confused, but it is a natural part of the way we talk, and the natural way of English language. For some countries, so if anybody's international that's on the call, so in Hungary, for instance, they only have one pronoun for all genders, which I know Hungary has some issues when it comes to LGBT plus rights. I often think that actually it could potentially solve a larger problem if everybody just identified in one way. And there are other countries out there as well where they only use one pronoun in particular. But the importance of pronoun, and one question we often get is on email signatures or your Instagram store or your Instagram page or your LinkedIn page. Why do people have their pronouns on there? And for some countries, for instance, so we work with a lot of companies who have offices in India, and some of the names might not present either masculine or feminine. So you may be unsure about what that person's gender is. So by having pronouns on your email signature and encouraging that as a business can often alleviate misgendering someone if you are on a call with them, for instance. So yeah, that's kind of I suppose, a quick, slight overview of kind of where we are with pronouns at the moment and kind of what it all means. I
guess then the big question raised is, what if you fuck it up?
What if you fuck it up? It's okay. Just don't be a dick about it. That's the one thing. And we were discussing this last week. And I remember having a session with a very cool retailer a few years ago, and we were talking about what if we do something wrong, or how can we just be better people? And someone shouted out, "Don't be a dick." And I was like, you know what? That's very gendered, but I like the way we're going with this. So what else could we say? And then someone said, "Oh, don't be a pussy." And I was like, again, very gendered, not a very nice term either. But let's think of something else. And someone said, "Don't be an arsehole." And I was like, I really like that. But I want to do my due diligence and make sure that everybody has an arsehole. And turns out 1 in 5,000 people don't. So we came up with a phrase for this business and "don't be a shit," because everybody still shits, even if you don't have an arsehole. So that's the theme we came up for them as a business, and that's the motto that they still have to this day, is "don't be a shit" when potentially someone pulls you up for misgendering them, for instance, or using the wrong pronouns. And if you do use the wrong pronouns, it's okay to get it wrong. First or second time, it's absolutely okay to get it wrong. Third, fourth, fifth, or sixth time, you're probably being a bit ignorant, especially if this person's already told you. And if you're just unsure or really nervous about it, ask. If someone comes up to you and says, look, these are the pronouns that I now use, just say to them, look, this is really new for me, and I want to make sure that I get it right. So if I do make a mistake, I apologize, but please correct me if I do, because I want to make sure that I get this right for you as an individual. But like I said, if you do make multiple mistakes, it could come down to ignorance on your part. We often do a bit of an exercise called the 7 olive test. So for those who don't like olives, this might be something you could try. And this happened to me a few years ago where someone said to me, if you don't like olives, eat 7 olives in a row. And I was like, that sounds disgusting. I'm never doing it. And I got forced to do it. And I now love olives with everything. A dirty martini is one of my favorite things. Just like sign me up with olive juice, olives, everything. And there is a purpose behind this exercise. It's learned human behavior. So if someone says to you for the first time, look, I'm changing my pronouns, I'm transitioning, or I'm becoming non-binary, then use the 7 olive test and just say to them, say their name over and over in your head 7 times, as well as what their pronouns are. So for me, for instance, you would say Chris, he, him, Chris, he, him, Chris, he, him 7 times until it becomes just natural and normal. What I would say is don't do it in front of them, because you're going to look weird when you're saying their name and pronouns 7 times when they have just introduced themselves potentially. Take yourself off and just either repeat it in your head or repeat it externally, however best you learn. And that way it gets ingrained, and it's that repeat behavior, and eventually you'll get it right and it'll just be natural. A couple of other things as well. So like on Zoom, Teams, you can add in options for your pronouns. So it alleviates, again, questions being asked. If you're comfortable enough to go on a call or meet someone for the first time, introduce yourself. So like I said at the start of the call, my name's Chris. My pronouns are he, him, and his. Nick's just done it now. So we've got Nicholas Villani, he, him. And it's just a simple thing like that. And what we need to remember is when we're adding pronouns to our email signatures, to our Instagram, to our LinkedIn, and things like that, it's not about us. And it's not an us thing, it's a them thing. Because what we're trying to do is create a safe space for people who are perhaps transitioning or just about to come out or transition to being non-binary, and creating a safe space where they see your pronouns as part of your signature or on your profile. And it creates a safe space where they can potentially disclose what their pronouns are for the first time, or if they are transitioning. It's not about us, because a lot of us will have always known what our pronouns are. It's about creating that safe space for other people, and allowing them the space to disclose their pronouns if they see fit. What I would say is, as part of that, as a caveat, as a business, we shouldn't force people to disclose their pronouns. So if it is something we want to promote as a business, we promote it from the top and we talk about the importance. However, it shouldn't be mandatory for people to have to disclose what their pronouns are, because we don't want to force people out before they're ready to come out. As well. So just something to always be mindful of there. But yeah, if you mess up someone's pronouns, it's fine. We're all human. We all make mistakes, but it's about learning from that. I'm not a fan of cancel culture, which you'll hear in every single session I say. People should have the opportunity to work on the mistakes that they've made and learn from them and become better people on the basis of those mistakes. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. There's like loads of good tidbits in there. And that actually, the last comment you just made is actually very close to one of the questions we got submitted pre-workshop. So yeah, we'll launch into some of those now, because I think there's a little bit more to unpack here. Just a reminder again, if you want to ask any questions, please click the link that I've shared in the chat, or scan this QR code. It's going to stay up on the screen over this Q&A piece. You can ask questions anonymously at any point. But that last point that you raised, Chris, around that sort of not forcing people to do it, and I think that this question is kind of an interesting one. What to say to freedom of speech being thrown back at you when explaining to people about they, them pronouns and non-binary? And this is quite a difficult question to answer, but what's your take on it?
Everyone's allowed their own point of view, right? That's my philosophy. I feel like I always say we try and change the hearts and minds of everybody, but I'm also a realist and I know it's not always possible. So freedom of speech, everyone's entitled to freedom of speech. What it comes down to is respect. So even if you don't believe in the pronouns that someone's using, or the religion that someone follows, or someone's sexuality, or whatever it may be, just respect them for being who they are as individuals, much like they are going to respect you for being an individual. You may come to a point where you can't agree, but if we can just respect each other, that will set us so much forward than where we are right now as a society. So it's what Aretha Franklin always said. It's all about RESPCT. So it just comes down to respect at the end of the day. So we can try and educate, we can try and support, and that's something that's our philosophy as a business. I'm not here to point a finger and say you are wrong. I'm here to try and educate and support and help people understand why people identify the way that they do. However, if you still can't agree with it, just if you can respect them for it, much like they'll respect you, that's half the battle.
I love that you've got a Aretha Franklin quote
Oh,
into this.
If I don't quote Aretha or RuPaul in one of my workshops, something's very wrong.
You haven't done your job.
Exactly.
Here's another quite heavy question we got submitted. That obviously refers to a very specific instance of something that happened. So someone working for a conservative brand and a particular negative experience that happened during COVID, where clearly the company tried to support the minority group. Maybe supporting that minority group, again, trying to read between the words here, potentially had a ripple effect across other teams in the organization, but has created some negativity around that. And then being told pretty much directly in a meeting to not bring up DEI. I mean, there's a question, maybe more advice for the person in terms of what should they do?
It's a difficult one. I think when we talk about supporting a specific minority inclusion, at the end of the day, it has to be for everybody. So everybody in your business has to feel included, but also needs to have a sense of belonging. And sometimes we see a lot of knee-jerk reactions from businesses. So this instance could have come during the height of BLM, where companies were like, shit, what do we do? Because we're being looked at by our clients, by our customers, and we need to put something out there. So it could have just been a case of, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but we need to do something because this is what the world wants us to do right now. And actually, no one needed to go external and actually talk publicly if you weren't ready to talk about it. It's about what you're doing internally as an organization to give people a better understanding. So the negativity about that. So negativity is still ongoing and affecting revenue. And I was told in a meeting to never bring up DE&I. So it could have just come down to lack of education across the whole business. It could have just been that they put something out that say, well, look, we're supporting this group and Black Lives Matter, which is super important. And these are the conversations we should be having, but these are also the conversations company-wide we need to be having about allyship, about white privilege, and about privilege in general as an organization. And we've seen a lot of this at the height of BLM and after BLM and kind of the after effect. So I'm assuming it could be a similar situation where there was a knee-jerk reaction by the company, but actually didn't explain to the rest of the business as to why this was important and why these conversations needed to happen, and then actually invested in education for the whole organization. So that's just what's come off the top of my mind, especially at the height of COVID, and that's potentially the scenario I think that could have happened. But it's all about making sure that if we are going to support a specific group, then we need to do education across the whole organization and not just say we're supporting this group with no explanation as to why, or kind of anything behind it, really.
I think, as you say, rightly so, it's all about education and a sort of acknowledgement. I mean, ignorance is often what creates these types of negative situations in businesses, not just specifically around DEI stuff, but around many different things that I see go wrong in companies.
Definitely, and like it's World Mental Health Day, I think today or later on this October. And again, people are jumping all over social media as businesses talking about the importance of it. But actually, are you checking in with your own people to see how they're coping with their mental health? And actually what support that they might need. We see it Pride Month, we talk about it all the time for Pride Month, and we see everybody change their logo to the rainbow flag, rainbow wash everything, and then on the 1st of July, apparently we just stop becoming gay. And we have to wait another year for that to happen. So it's this kind of tokenistic bullshit that a lot of companies fall into the trap of, and actually don't invest the time or money in order to make people understand and help them understand. And I from an LGBT point of view, like it's something I talk about all the time, is as a community, we're quite selfish sometimes, I feel, about the message that we put out there, because we tell people you just have to get it and you just have to understand it. But actually, we still have a position within the community and within society to educate people so they do get it and they do understand it, and not just tell them, look, I identify this way, you just have to get it. Sometimes, depending on if it's a generational thing or a cultural thing or anything like that, we just have to dig a little bit deeper, and actually just educate a little bit more.
Yeah. I think these days, Mental Health Day, Pride Month, etc., are great for raising awareness, but you're 100% right. This is, like, the gays don't go away after
we crawl back under a rock after June, and then we reappear. So yeah, exactly.
And it's about creating this integrated into the culture at work, that these things are spoken about every day, or that there are the right avenues or channels or support or resources or educational programs, so you can create a community within your workplace of trust and safety and so forth.
Not every business is going to get it right as well. I think that's just something to own up to. Like, the D&I calendar is really important. Those key dates are really important. However, you need to look internally at your business and actually who exists within your business. So doing a D&I survey is really important at the start of anybody's journey to understand who's within your organization, and then lay out a map about how do we make everybody in the business feel included based on who we have, and then start to look at externally, where are our gaps, and actually how do we drive more diversity into business. But if you don't get inclusion right, then we can never do that. And so it's just a negative knock-on opinion.
Yeah. I'm sure you've probably got some examples there, but maybe I won't put you on the spot of where this, has gone right, or maybe where it's gone horribly wrong. But I'll let you.
Well, I can be quite open. So they're very open about it as well. So we work with a heavy metal music festival based in the UK, and they had an instance a couple of years ago where one of the bookers took to Twitter and said, if you ever email me with your pronouns on your email signature, it's going straight in the bin. And what happened was they had no idea that 50% of the population who attend the festival every year are part of the LGBT plus community. So they had a big oh shit moment when it came to ticket sales. But then what they also didn't realize is a lot of the performers were also part of the LGBT plus community as well. So Rob Halford, who's the lead singer of Judas Priest, was one of the first openly gay heavy metal mainstream musicians to come out. I think it was in the 80s. He was also responsible for bringing the leather scene from the gay underground scene into mainstream rock and roll. So he had a huge impact on mainstream rock and roll, being from the LGBT plus community. So as a business, it was a massive misfire. And they came to us and said, look, we need some support. So we've been working with them over a couple of years about making sure that the festival is inclusive as possible. So looking at things like their VIP areas and kind of gender neutral toilets, and making sure there's safety for people, and making sure that there's visibility across the whole site, but also internally as bookers to get them to understand that actually that's not the right. If you don't understand it, ask questions. And I think it was a fear thing on her part. But that's a situation where it has gone wrong, but they've worked really hard over the last few years to make sure that they can learn from that mistake. Because like I said earlier, I'm not here to cancel anybody. I'm here to support, because we've all been there at some point where we've all potentially said something or done something and regretted it. And it's all about how do we learn from that and move on from it. So, and that's something they've done very successfully as a festival, and they're driving more diverse acts into the festival because of it.
Such a pertinent thing you said there, but I think if you don't understand, ask questions.
Yeah.
Which actually brings us to the last question that we got submitted pre, and I can see we've got some good questions coming through live in this. So again, if you want to ask any, please scan that QR code and ask them. We've kind of answered this a little bit, but anything you'd like to add around, how can you explain it to others in the workplace without coming across as too preachy?
I think it's about creating a safe environment. And what we always say at the start of all our sessions is this is a safe place. So if you don't understand, or if you do have questions, this is the perfect opportunity to ask those questions, or an opportunity to explain to people what this actually means. So I refer to, we did a workshop for a theatre company a few months ago, and that was the same guy who said he likes a lot of burgers. He said at the very start of the session, I just don't understand they and them. I was like, okay, so when we got to that point, I just opened up the floor and I said, ask any questions that you want to ask. And with him, the explanation I gave earlier was it's not a you thing, it's a them thing. And as soon as we explained it to him in such a simple term, he just got it. And what was the most impactful thing as a business is we created that safe space for them. But what was interesting at the very start of the day, they were doing a big kind of educational day as an organization. At the start, they all got new name badges and they all got asked to put the pronouns on their name badges. And no one said that they would do it. By the time we ran the sessions and we explained in layman's terms kind of the importance of pronouns and why people use different pronouns, everybody went back to the front desk and got their pronouns added onto their name badges. So that was a huge, small win, but something that had a massive, massive impact to them as a theatre, but also for some of the people that they had in their teams as well. So just, I would say, create that safe space where people can ask questions, and let people debate as well. One thing I love as a facilitator is to be challenged slightly. So challenge me on why you feel the way and challenge me on why perhaps you disagree with me. I might not have all the answers, but let's have an open conversation and debate about it.
Awesome. And of course, the obvious answer there is if you really do see this as something that you need to get your workplace on the same page of, book Chris to come and run a workshop.
Exactly.
For you.
Yeah, book me. Yeah.
This is sales. So good. We've got a few questions coming through here, some comments and questions. So, best tip I've heard: if you're struggling, then practice on your own by saying 5 compliments about the person out there using the right pronoun. So, there's another bit of tidbit that's come from someone in the audience today. I love that as well. I usually say that people talking about freedom of speech just want a freedom of consequences from saying what they want, and that consequences to them is being considered a shit. Do you have a take on that, Chris?
Sometimes what people say does have consequences. We look at people like Piers Morgan. What he says does have consequences. When he approached someone and said that he was a black lesbian, like, you cannot transition your ethnicity. It's impossible. It's something that no one can do. You can transition your gender, and if he did transition, then perhaps he would be a lesbian and he would be able to relate in a certain way. However, there has to be some consequences about what some people say. So it's freedom of speech within reason, I guess. One of the biggest challenges I had in a workshop that we did was someone tried to challenge me about ethnicity and actually transitioning ethnicity, but also about another topic, which I'm not going to talk about because it's triggering for people, where he said that, well, everybody surely has the opportunity to exist. And the group he was talking about are people who prey on younger people. And I was like, well, no, because what you're doing there is preying on people who don't have the equipment to deal with that type of situation or be aware of what's going on or anything like that. So you'll always try and get people who push your buttons. But at the end of the day, that's being a shit, and by trying to provoke that type of argument because you don't necessarily understand it themselves. That session that we were in as well was actually about him as an individual, which I think is why he was trying to provoke. But we did come to an agreement at the end, and it just came down to just respecting each other, even if you can't agree.
Any advice on helping our teams understand that we really do care and we're not rainbow washing? A lot of people are rightly cynical.
Don't shout about it. So when it comes to Pride, so one of our clients, that we were talking to them about this, and they said, you've not done anything publicly for Pride. And she was like, we're not ready as a business, and we want to really focus internally about getting this right, first of all, before we start shouting about it. So showing people that we're invested in it, and actually, if you're a leader within a business, signing off on a budget that's going to allow you, because it does cost money, as much as we want to try and help people as much as possible for free, this does cost money, and just show people that we are committed to it, and it's something that we are taking very seriously, and we're not just looking at the key dates in the D+I calendar. So if you do want to run something on LGBT plus inclusion, you don't have to do it in June. Like, you can do it at any point throughout the year. Don't just use June as a focal point because it's in the calendar. So yeah, don't have to shout about it externally. Look at it internally. Be honest. Be transparent. And make sure you can show those receipts as well. So I'm a big Real Housewives fan, and they always talk about showing those receipts on the reunions. And what I mean by that is, when anybody who's looking to join your organization, what we're finding, a lot of the questions that they're asking is, does anybody look like me? Does anyone have the same experiences as me? What's your D&I stats as a business? If you don't have that right now, then in the next few years, as Gen Z starts to progress into the workforce, in particular, then you may run into a few issues. So it's about looking internally, making sure that you're working internally on making inclusion the heart of everything that you do, but also having that data and information and just being really honest and transparent about having that data. If you're a bunch of white guys who run a business, that's okay, but just be honest about it. Don't wash all over your website and use stock imagery of a diverse population and all this kind of thing. Own the fact that that's what you look like, but also own the fact that you understand what D&I means and what it can do for your business. One of the best TED Talks I've ever watched was Rent a Minority. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it, but it's a woman who was brown, she's Indian and a lesbian, and she was fed up of always being called out for all the kind of dates in the calendar and kind of marketing exercises and all that kind of thing, because she ticked multiple boxes. So she set up a website as a joke called Rent a Minority, and she found that some of the biggest businesses in the world were signing up legitimately to try and rent a minority for these kind of marketing days or whatever. But the saddest part was that people who were from minority backgrounds were also signing up thinking it was an okay thing for them to do. So it just showed how much further we've got as a society and as businesses to ensure that we're not just washing over these key dates and stuff like that. But it's a fantastic TED Talk. So if you just go into YouTube and type in Rent a Minority, it's the first one that comes up.
Brilliant. We can share that around after this session as well. I think we might have one more question in here that I might have skipped over. What's the best way to deal with someone who doesn't wish to use someone's pronouns in the workplace?
It depends. If they're doing it because they're trying to be provocative, then again, it's that conversation around respect. And if you don't want to use their pronouns, use their name. I'd encourage them to use that person's name instead. If someone doesn't want to disclose their pronouns, then we again have to respect them for that. And again, it's kind of defaulting to either gender neutral, if they're not willing to disclose what they identify as, or use their name in that situation.
Okay, good advice. Good advice. I think that brings us to the end of the questions. And I know there's been a very short session, but it has been super insightful. And suddenly, I always learn a lot from hearing you talk, Chris. So thank you very much for joining us today and asking these questions. I saw one other question come through. Yes, we will share the recording of the session afterwards. You'll receive an email from Louis and our team with a link to the recording. So if you do want to share this around internally, we'll also include Chris's details if you do want to get in touch with him about running longer form sort of workshop around pronouns or anything else to do with DEI. There's some fantastic stuff that he does in that space. We also at Coteam are holding a workshop next week, same day, same time, something slightly different. So this is through one of our Coteam subsidiaries called Edify, which focuses on the impact of AI on businesses. We are talking about bias and discrimination with AI. So if this is an interesting topic to you, make sure you come along to this session next week. Same time, also free, another brilliant specialist, an AI ethics specialist joining us there, Wes Rahman. You can sign up using the link that I've just shared in the chat. That brings us in the session. We're pretty much right on time. Chris, anything to add from your side? Any closing pearls of wisdom?
Ask questions. So if someone, like I said earlier, if someone does disclose their pronouns and you're not quite sure what it means, it's okay to ask a question. What I would say on the back of that, though, is don't rely on those who have these experiences for all your information. We all have access to the internet. We all have access to these little rectangular things that in our pockets have all this information in it. So do your research. There's loads of books out there. We can share a list of resources with Nick, who I'm sure can share it with you all after. But make sure you also get your information from verified sources. So if you are using social media, make sure they've got a blue tick, apart from Twitter, because we know you can buy a tick now on Twitter. But yeah,
I think you mean X, right?
X, sorry, X. Yeah, sorry. I see that I'm such an elder millennial that I just can't even change my my mindset. But yeah, so X or TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or wherever you get your information from, make sure that it's verified. But yeah, there's books out, there's lots of free information that's out there. We have a plethora of resources on our website as well. So yeah, just make sure that you're also doing your own education and not always relying on the others who have had those experiences.
Brilliant. I'm also going to quickly share the link to your website there in the chat. Chris, so people can check out some of the programs that you're running as well, because there's some fantastic stuff there. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Chris, for being here.
Having me.
Being part of this, very interesting conversation. And hopefully useful session for everyone. We'll send around the recording afterwards. Wish you have a lovely Tuesday.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.